revolution. This is the market revolution is what's happening in the background. All right? You've got the Declaration of Independence, you have war, you have independence, you have Americans slowly moving westward as the British are defeated and kicked out of North America, well, kicked out of America and kicked out of the West. And then after the War of 1812, the British presence is completely eliminated, and the Native Americans to the west of the Appalachian and Allegheny Mountains, their threat is eliminated. They're dispossessed. They're moved. So the flood of Americans moving westward is pronounced. What does this mean? It means the cultures of the Northeast, the farms, the cities, the industry, the public schooling, the lack of slave labor expands from the Northeast, New York, Vermont, Massachusetts, and expands into Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, Michigan. The culture of the Southeast, plantation culture, South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, it expands to the Southwest, Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas. So what you see during the market revolution is a deepening difference between northern society and economics and southern society economics, A. But you also see increasing connections between the Northeast and the Northwest because of similar economies. And less and less economic connections between North and South as they diverge. You also see tremendous economic expansion at this time. Because once people start settling in the West and expanding those farms and trading with the cities and the factories of the East, the American Industrial Revolution begins, the expansion of agriculture, cotton production goes through the roof. America begins its climb to superpower status at this time because they have what they need. They've got natural resources, they got people to buy the stuff they're making, they have developing industry, they have agriculture that they can export to the rest of the world, they have cotton that the rest of the world desperately needs. So America is becoming wealthier and wealthier. The market is a capitalist market. America is becoming much more capitalist, much more there's more trade between East and West, between America and the outside world. America is being brought into a national market is developing, an international trade relations are developing. There is an expanding middle class. Immigrants are flooding into America because there's land, there's jobs in the cities. And all of this changes America during the market revolution. It changes the meaning of freedom. All of these things I'm going to talk about today. So, get ready. I hope you got the PowerPoint with you. Here we go. So, in a nutshell, the market revolution, it takes all of these Western farms where the settlers first settled, and they cleared the land, and they farm their products, and they're self-sufficient, and if they have any extra, they sell it in the local town or the local village. But they're not trading with cities hundreds of miles away. They're certainly not exporting their products overseas because they're isolated. They got no roads. The rivers are not navigable. They don't have any railroads yet. But the market revolution links the eastern cities to the western farms, and the western farms to the eastern cities to the international market. All of this is through infrastructure, which I'll talk about in a moment. Let me just keep going. Let me just push forward. All right, I've already said all this. What infrastructure am I talking about? The national government and the state government started investing money simply to bind the country together. For instance, turnpikes. Up until the early 19th century, a road was essentially a dirt road, which was created by people using the same path over and over again. Maybe clearing some trees, whatever the case may be. But the problem is, when it rains, roads become impassable. Well, if the roads are impassable, then you have no trade. And that is a barrier to economic expansion. Unpredictable travel. So during this time, monies were raised to create the first turnpikes, paved roads, roads that could last throughout the winter, through the rains, and that drastically increased travel between towns and villages and cities, which increases trade. Steamboats. America is blessed with many, many rivers. You got the Great Lakes. You got the St. Lawrence Seaway that goes east and west. You've got the Great Mississippi River, the Ohio, all of these great rivers that make travel on the rivers inexpensive. And all the big cities are on rivers. The problem is, once you get your stuff downriver to the city, how do you get back up? In the past, you'd have a raft, which was dragged upstream by a horse on the side of the water. That is impractical. But steamships allowed you to now sail downriver, turn around, and go up against the river current. Now all of a sudden, inexpensive water travel goes in both directions, increasing trade. Canals. In order to connect all of these inexpensive waterways, rivers, canals were needed, just to bring even more land into easier navigation. The most ambitious canal was built in upstate New York, the Erie Canal, and it opened up the entire Midwest to a global market. And it was funded by New York State, because they recognized this thing is expensive to make, but once it happens, you can sail from Europe to New York, up the Hudson River, bang a left, go across upstate New York, because the canal connects the Hudson River to the Great Lakes. And once you're in the Great Lakes, you can go deep into the Midwest, never having touched the ground. All waterborne traffic, which is the least expensive form of travel at the time. Once the Erie Canal was completed, trade that went through New York State went through the roof, especially connecting the Midwest with the East. Now, all of this dwarfed. Well, let me show you some expansion. These are the principal rivers, roads, and canals in 1840. So, the canals are the dotted ones. The big primary roads, the turnpikes, are the bluish ones. The secondary roads, the less major, are the orange ones. And then you have the major rivers, Illinois, Mississippi, Missouri. Let's see, here is the Erie Canal connecting the Hudson River to Lake Erie. And from here, you can just sail everywhere. So, by 1840, the 13 and now all the United States are increasingly bound together with roads, rivers, canals. But all of this is nothing compared to this. Railroads. By 1870, railroads connected, and you can see there's more railroads in the north, but railroads connected the entire north, the south, all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Railroads were the wonder invention of the 19th century because canals take time to dig. Roads take time to build. And rivers are just rivers. They're there. You can't invent a river. But railroads, you can put them anywhere. You can go anywhere you want. You have to go through mountains sometimes. You have to build a bridge over a stream. Maybe you have to clear a forest. But railroads go anywhere. Nothing is off limits all of a sudden. And so now all of that American land in the West that was now cleared of Native Americans was open to Western settlement. It was open to farming. And it became the breadbasket of America, where grains were grown and shipped east to be processed or sold overseas. Or cotton was grown to be shipped overseas. Railroads were the one. The first one opened in 1828. All of this stimulated the Industrial Revolution. because many industries were working together to build the railroads. You needed iron in order for the trains, for the tracks. So the iron industry exploded because it had all this demand. Engineering, the people that build these things, that industry expanded. Transportation, getting the stuff out west as you lay the tracks, that industry expanded. And how do you power these trains? Coal. So now the coal industry expands. The Industrial Revolution is when all of these industries start helping each other over and over and just slowly industrializing every part of the economy. Let me give you an example. The iPhone, right? In order to build the iPhone, you need someone who does the innards, the actual programming. You need the actual circuitry on the inside. You need the body of the phone, the glass. All of this stuff is done by separate industries, which came into existence once the demand for the iPhone exploded. And then the iPhone case, because you don't want to drop your phone and have it break. A whole industry developed around bumpers. No one ever heard the term before the iPhone was invented and you were paying, a mortgage for a telephone. So these things develop, right? The telegraph is also critical because now that people can actually travel to each other, they want to talk to each other. And the telegraph, does anybody, okay. The telephone, you talk, words come out the other side. You follow me? The telegraph was when you can communicate using dots and dashes like sounds, beep, 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 etc. So a language developed, Morse code, laid telegraph wires across America and underwater connecting the world. Now you have, for the first time, instantaneous national and international communication. And what are they communicating? Strategy, if you're conquering territory, or diplomacy, but most importantly, trade. All of this is making national and international trade easier, which makes the economy expand, which transforms America. So this is the railroads that expanded by 1870. As you can see, many more are in the north than in the south, a consequence of the north having more cities, more industry, more small farms that have to connect with the outside world. Down here, very few cities, very few industries, and the farms are huge plantations. They don't need a bunch of railroads connecting the huge plantations. Here are the telegraph lines that connect, the major telegraph lines that connect all the major cities and, of course, one end of the country to the other. And it's no surprise that these telegraph lines, wherever they go, these are all areas of population, and the Transcontinental Railroad also goes through the exact same period, same line. The railroads and the telegraphs follow each other. See? Right there. That's the telegraph line as well. So, the result of all this, the elimination of Native Americans in the West, the elimination of the British threat, the expansion of railroads, roads, telegraphs, all that free land that the government has given away because they want to populate it with Americans, white Americans. You have something like 4.5 million people that cross over the Appalachian Mountains and go westward. And they keep going west until they settle down. 4.5 million people after the War of 1812 crossed the Appalachian Mountains, which run north and south along the original 13 colonies. What does 4.5 million people mean? It's just a number. 4.5 million people that went west is more than everybody that lived in the country in 1789. So think about that. Everybody that lived in America in 1789, that number, more than that number, was now moving westward, meaning the population of the country was expanding pretty thoroughly. And the cultures they brought with them mimicked where they came from. So, for instance, if you moved from the north, if you moved into the Northwest, you likely came from New York, New England, maybe Pennsylvania. By New England, I mean, of course, Connecticut, Massachusetts, etc. And the cultures there, far more cities, small towns that all came with their own churches and their own public schools. Quite democratic, because there was a lot of people that owned property, either a small shop, a small farm, so they had the right to vote, and virtually no slavery. This was the culture that was taken from the Northeast to the new territories of the Northwest. The Southwest replicated the plantation culture of the Southeast. Like I said, very few cities. The elites dominated the economy, the politics, the culture, because they had all the money, they had all the political pull. And of course, it is a slave-based society. So, this is America in 1821. You got the original 13 colonies over here. The Appalachian Mountains run right here. Crossing the Appalachian Mountains after the War of 1812, you now have the population of and the entrance into America of the new states of Alabama, 1819, Mississippi, 1817, Louisiana, 1812, Missouri, 21, Illinois, 18. All of this is populated and turned into actual states where they can vote for president, they could send congressmen to Congress after the War of 1812. All of this is owned by the United States, part of the Louisiana Purchase, but still unorganized, as in it hasn't become states yet. All of this belongs to Mexico, so modern-day Texas, California, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, all belongs to Mexico. What we know today as the states of Oregon and Washington, at the time were jointly administered with the British, but eventually we just buy it from them. And Florida, we take in 1819 from the Spanish. We didn't take, we basically bought it. All right then. So now we get to what happens when Americans push westward. The increasing division between North and South. Why? Because of what's known as the Cotton Kingdom. At the end of the 1700s and the early 1800s, cotton became to America what oil is today to the Middle East. They've got the product, and the world depends on it, and the world is willing to pay basically anything to get it. So cotton. Cotton is the raw material needed for the Industrial Revolution of America, of England, France. Any modern industrial country has a textile manufacturing industry, I guess. Machines that make clothing, cotton clothing. You need raw cotton. Now, the entire process of producing cotton through a machine has already been mechanized by the end of the 1700s. It used to all be done by hand, but now it's all done by machine. It's faster, it's cheaper, it's more efficient. The one thing that couldn't be mechanized was the cleaning of cotton. That was still done by, the two things that could not be done by machine was the picking of cotton and the cleaning of cotton before it got sent to the machines to be processed into fabric. That was still done. The early stage was done by slaves. So there was a bit of a holdup in terms of the getting raw cotton materials that factories all over America and the world were demanding, the raw cotton. But in 1793, Eli Whitney, an American, invented the cotton gin. This made the cleaning of cotton easier, which meant the only part of the production of cotton through machines that could not be mechanized yet was the picking of cotton out of the ground. What does that mean for America? It means the need for slavery became greater because now cotton became central to the American economy. And the only thing that you couldn't replace with machines is picking the cotton out of the ground. And remember, the slave trade is ending in 1808. So 1793, Eli Whitney invents the cotton gin. Everybody immediately realizes that the only way to make cotton manufacturing profitable is you need slaves to get the cotton out of the ground, to feed it into the cotton gin. But you can't buy any more slaves from overseas after 1808. So very quickly, the South increases its number of slaves, and it holds on to them for dear life, because they have no other alternative to be profitable unless you have slaves. And the slave trade is over in 1808. And thereafter, they're not freeing anybody. And they're holding on to slavery much stronger than before, and they are far less open to any discussion of the gradual abolition of slavery. So the South is becoming more and more cotton, plantation, slave-based, at the same time that the North is becoming more industrial, small farmers, eliminating slaves, building railroads, expanding the size of their cities. It's like two different countries speaking the same language, with having the same religion and the same government. As Americans pushed westward, and they needed slaves to farm these new cotton plantations, they bought what they could from overseas, and once that was closed down, they started buying slaves from plantations in the southeast that no longer needed them. Maybe the land was exhausted, tobacco plantations exhaust the land. Maybe there were excess slaves that could be sold off, and they were bought and brought westward. Over 1 million of them were forced westward. But you never buy whole families. No one is going to buy an elderly woman or a child, a young child, or an elderly man. The slaves that were sold were obviously men in their prime that could work the plantations. So the result of this westward expansion is the destruction of millions of families as children were torn away from their parents. And the numbers here tell you why. In 1796, just 3 years after the cotton gin was invented, the South was producing 5 million pounds of cotton. Now, I'm sure all of you are familiar with cotton balls. So imagine how much cotton you have to compress from those bags of cotton balls from Duane Reade to make a pound, right? And the South was producing 5 million pounds of cotton, raw cotton, in 1796, only 3 years after the cotton gin was invented. By 1820, that number goes up to 170 million. This is only a difference of 25 years, from 5 to 170 million. This is hundreds of percentages of increase. This doesn't really happen anywhere else. So, this is what I just said earlier, and you can refer to in your PowerPoint later on. The South remains rural, agricultural, etc. The North, more commercial farming, not plantation cotton farming. More cities, more factories develop. Now, the other consequence of the market revolution is immigration. As Americans are pushing westward, as the cities are expanding, as factories are expanding, they need labor. They need people to work these expanding factories to settle the lands in the West. So the American immigration policy at this time is, come on down. We need you in the factories, we need you in the ports, we need you in the small shops, we need you on the farms. And we're giving away land out west, because if we don't put Americans there, the Native Americans will come back. So, the number of people that came over was extraordinary. Between 1840 and 1860, 4 million immigrants flood into the country. Many of them are coming from Ireland. There was an Irish potato famine in the 1840s where the potato, their primary crop, was destroyed by plague. People were starving. They were desperate to leave. And America was the way to go. If you've ever wondered why virtually every cop or firefighter all basically looks or is or sounds Irish, this is why. All their ancestors came over in the 1840s. And they came to New York, they came to Boston, they came to Philadelphia. And after a while, they joined the police forces or the firefighters, and they passed that tradition down. Or they joined the Democratic Party, the only party that would support immigrants. Yeah?
Pennsylvania, we have an Irish potato famine statue.
We also have one, we also have one right down by Battery Park. Yeah, what is it? The ferry that takes you to either Ellis Island or Staten Island. There's an Irish potato famine statue right there. It's New York City, there is a statue to everything and everybody in this city. There's an Alice in Wonderland statue in Central Park.
There is?
Yes.
Yeah, I've been thinking like
It's by the zoo. It's by the zoo. If you got kids, bring them there. Put them on a big mushroom. It's cute. It's a wonderful picture. Or if you have a girlfriend, boyfriend, bring them there and take a picture. It's cute. All right, so why did they leave Europe and come to America? And why did they mostly go to the north? It's pretty simple. In the north, you had factories and all the land. In the south, all the cheap labor was done by slaves, so there was no jobs there. So you have all these people from Germany, from Ireland, from England, eventually from Sweden, all coming to the north, settling in the cities or moving out west. Another reason why they were coming over is it was cheaper to travel overseas for the first time in history. You get on a steamship, and all of a sudden you go from Ireland to New York City, and the desperately poor can afford to do it. This isn't the period of the indentured servants where you have to sell yourself into slavery to get across the Atlantic. Now even the desperately poor can get on a ship, crappy accommodations, but 2 weeks later, you're in the New World. And oftentimes, there'll be a member of the Democratic Party waiting for you to welcome you to America and sign you up as a Democratic Party voter. I'll get to that in future chapters. I mentioned the Irish potato famine, but also the other thing was, besides economic opportunity, a lot of these people that were coming over, they were fleeing economic exploitation, political oppression, and they were coming to a land that actually had a Bill of Rights that says freedom of speech is the law. It's not a gift from the government, it's the law, end of story. And that was revolutionary to most people, that you could actually sue for your civil rights. A lot of these folks were coming from territories that still had kings, absolutism, not really representative government or constitutions. Now, as always happens in America, when too many immigrants come over too quickly and they start taking over, quote-unquote, the American jobs, it's always the American jobs that are taken over that Americans don't want to do. Have you noticed that? Every attack against immigrants throughout history hasn't been, they're taking our jobs. Yes, but they're the only ones who want to do those jobs. Nobody else wants to work for $3 an hour bussing tables or doing the dirtiest of the dirty job. No one else wants to do it but immigrants because they know this is the first stage of moving to the next level. We've all gone through it. That idea that they're coming to take our jobs, which Americans don't want to do in the first place, it isn't new to the 21st century. It was going on way back then. This country has had a cycle of anti-immigrant, or what's known as nativism, backlash. The Alien and Sedition Act, that was an anti-immigrant backlash. There's too many people coming over from Ireland and England with their radical political ideas. We have to cut off the flow. The Alien Act restricted citizenship unless you lived here for a long time, otherwise they kick you out. Now, during this period where millions of Irish men and women were coming over, Americans freaked out because the Irish seemed different. The belief was, how could they be Democrats? Because they're Catholics. And you might say, what in the world does that have anything to do with anything? Let me explain it to you the way they understood it. If you are a Catholic, technically, the head of your church is the Pope in Rome, who is, according to Catholic doctrine, incapable of making a mistake. He is infallible. If he establishes a rule for how to live your life as a good Catholic so that you go to heaven, if you are a member of the church, you obey. If you don't, you leave the church or you get kicked out. That's basically the way it works, which is why the Catholic Church has been around for thousands of years. Democracy, your ultimate allegiance is not to a religious figure, it is to the government that you elect as an independent, free-thinking person. That's the way they were thinking. So the idea back then was, how can you be loyal to America, the nation, but also loyal to the Catholic Pope in the Vatican? You have dual loyalties. Moreover, Catholicism does not encourage discussion. They give the orders, you obey. That's not the way America works, where the people are the ones with the power. They talk back to their politicians. So the Irish, being Catholic, was believed they were improperly trained to be free-thinking democratic citizens. You follow me? Yes? I know it's a stupid thing, but what racism is not stupid? Which is basically what this is. It was bigotry, because most of the Americans at the time were Protestants, and Catholics were considered the enemy. Now, the other thing that bothered many Americans were these Irish were often not very cultured, very poor, dirty, had these kind of odd accents. It was almost like a different language. They stuck together with their odd traditions, almost impenetrable. They seemed different. Basically, modern-day anti-immigration thinking, right? They were deemed lazy, not very intelligent. The ones that did work were stealing quote-unquote American jobs. And because they were lazy and not very intelligent, they were easily manipulated by politicians who bought their votes. And so they couldn't be trusted to have the vote. In the 1840s, you had these first anti-immigrant riots. Because all of a sudden you looked around and was like, my God, this neighborhood has been taken over by the Irish. I know it's difficult for us to conceive that the Irish, who are white, were considered to be foreign and dangerous. But this is going to blow your mind. So get ready. Like, hold on to your seats if you have to. What we consider white today, back then in the 1790s and the early 1800s, was far different. I don't think anybody in this room would look at me and say, you are not white. I'm about as white as they come. But I'm of Italian background, which in the 1800s was considered not white. And if I were Jewish in the 1800s, that was considered not white. Irish was considered not white. Russian, not white. White meant British, Protestant. Understand what I'm saying? So when did my people get considered white? When people of darker skin started coming over, and all of a sudden you expand the definition of white pretty liberally, and you bring in everybody. And if you think that's interesting, if any of you are from the Dominican or Puerto Rico or any Caribbean nation, definitions of what's white or not white there are vastly different than our country, and they're all historically constructed. Right? But that's a whole other class. But for now, the third part that I want to discuss is the redefinition of freedom, which is a consequence of the market revolution. Now, this is also kind of important for your midterm, so let me tell you. Up until the market revolution, when Americans talked about my freedoms, my rights, what they were basically referring to was the English Bill of Rights. or the American Bill of Rights, or the Declaration of Independence. Things that you all know. Freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom to elect my own government, no taxation without representation, freedom of religion, the right to bear arms, right? But by 1810, 1820, 1830, 1840, no one's fighting for freedom of speech anymore. The First Amendment is a bedrock law of America. No one's taking it away. The right to bear arms, Second Amendment, no one's taken that away. The Fifth Amendment, the right against self-incrimination, that's law. It's been law for now 40 years. So people are no longer talking about, these are my rights that I hold most dear, because no one's afraid of losing them. So then how do they define what it is to be an American that enjoys their freedoms? Well, they've expanded the definition of freedom. And now freedom is redefined to being something along the lines of, where is it? Individualism. The freedom of the individual to find self-fulfillment. Well, what does that mean, self-fulfillment? It can mean anything. It can mean wanting to be a businessman, wanting to write a book or poetry, wanting to travel out west, wanting to live wherever I want. Well, what does that have to do with anything? By the 1840s, because there was so much economic opportunity for anybody that was willing to work, that was white. You could go to the cities. There was always a job in the factory. You can go out west and work on a farm or maybe even buy your own farm. There was all this opportunity. What people wanted by the 1840s was just to be left alone. I don't want to be taxed by my government. I don't want to be told what I can and cannot do. I want to use all these opportunities to find individual self-fulfillment, either economic wealth, mostly economic wealth. The American dream is born at this time, that if you just work, you will be successful. That is a transition of the meaning of freedom and rights from a list of things that I'm entitled to, protected by my government, to I just want to be left alone, to find my own way. Now, obviously, some people benefited from the market revolution a lot more than others. For instance, in the era of tremendous economic expansion, where governments just essentially allowed the settlers to move out west, businesses to expand, there was a lot of opportunities to make money. There was an exploding white middle class. And the businesses that did the best, banks, merchants, industrialists, southern planters, even people that weren't independent businessmen, employees of the banks, of the merchant houses, of the industries, small farmers, craftsmen, people who made products to sell in markets, the professionals like the lawyers, the teachers, etc., accountants, all of these people found economic opportunity in the market revolution, and the middle class exploded. But obviously some people did not benefit from this economic opportunity. Free blacks experienced poverty, increasing poverty. Whites wouldn't hire them. They were considered to be competition, cheap competition, and their skills were ignored, and they were forced into menial or poor-paying labor, setting off a cycle of poverty, because you can't save money when you're paid that little during the market revolution. Some states in the North simply prohibited blacks to move into their states. Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, and Oregon actually had laws saying you can't move to these states if you're black. These are northern states that didn't have slavery, but they didn't want blacks in their states either. So the freedom to move was taken away. The freedom of any job you wanted was not an option. What is most ironic about all this? Illinois. What president came from Illinois? Yes, but the one who abolished slavery. Abraham Lincoln came from Illinois, a state that barred the entrance of blacks. Now that is historical irony. Women, as usual, did not fare well. Why? The Industrial Revolution. More and more people are working in factories. Increasingly, work is work is increasingly characterized as something that you get a wage for. So tell me this. Do women get paid for raising their kids? No. Do they get paid for preparing the meals for their families? Not actual paid, like an actual check. Do they get paid? No. Cleaning the house? No. In an era where more and more people are working in factories and getting actual pay, hourly wages, work is now seen as valuable only if you get actual money. Work that is done without actual payment is just considered volunteer work. And increasingly, it's seen as women's natural role. Why would you get paid for raising your kids? That's the natural role of a woman. That was the developing idea, which made it difficult for women to break out of those roles, both economically and socially. And for those women that did manage to work outside the home, they were always paid less than men. And if you were married, you didn't control your own wages. They were controlled by your husband, and if you were living at home, by your father. Women were always paid less than men back then, because the belief was, if you're working, you probably has a husband that's also working. And so, why would we pay you the exact amount as your husband? We're going to give you a supplemental wage, which has been difficult to break that habit in America, where women are still paid 75 cents to the dollar to what men make? Maybe it's 80, but it's still not equal. And finally, I will leave you with this, and I'll redo this whenever we get back to this. The market revolution also screwed workers. And so you have the beginnings of a labor movement, unions, strikes. Because you have all of these developing factories, but with factories comes a working class. People that work long hours, at poor wages, with no control over their work environment. And the more and more workers you put in the same city or in the same industry, eventually they're going to start talking to each other and saying, we have common problems. Well, how do we solve them? Why don't we unionize, go on strike, force our employer to whatever, put a heater in the factory for the winter so we're not freezing, or things like that. The early labor movement used the same language that Thomas Jefferson used, the same language that was being used during the market revolution about freedom, about individual self-fulfillment. Jefferson was all about give everybody a farm so they're independent, they can vote. The workers were saying, we need a decent wage. We need to have some kind of independence, a decent wage, so that we're not, quote-unquote, wage slaves. What's a wage slave? Yes, I'm not a slave, but you pay me so little that I'm basically a slave. I have no control over my life. The term slave was used on purpose to make a mistake. Essentially, the argument was, how can you be against slavery, but then you treat your workers so poorly and you pay them so badly that they have virtually no control over their life? But they're using that language. of equality, of economic independence, of individual self-fulfillment, which is increasingly common at the time, right? So, at the end, is there any more? No. At the end, the market revolution changed America. It opened up the West. It bound the country together economically. It increased commercial activity. And it created this culture of individualism, self-reliant individualism. But it also made the division between North and South deeper. It expanded slavery. It made even the lives of free blacks worse, if at all possible. And it gave birth to a labor movement as more and more workers are being exploited by the growth of industry. And that's it. You're now ready for the midterm. So, this Thursday, in-class review for the midterm. Print out the sheet, bring it with you. And I will see you in a couple of days. The answer is no. There's no multiple choice. You're just because multiple choice isn't as valuable as writing medium-length essays.
Professor, one quick question. Is the midterm going to be like an essay? It's like you have to do it like an essay?
It's writing. It's not marked on grammar. It's marked on content.
Okay, good.
Did you come in late?
Yeah.
All right, I'll mark you down.
Thank you.
Jasmine and Nicotis.
So, do you
Good night.
Yeah, I just gotta remember the tape.
I find it down. You know what I think I got from the studio?
Oh,
You know what I've been doing? Go take attendance and go take class with the tutors. For real. I'm serious.
okay, that would be a good idea.
Look, I'm here for
Yeah, like our professor here. Just
I know. Oh my God, Professor, why don't I have my last class?
Why
So
can't
I
you
could
teach
go
math,
home
Professor?
What class is it?
math and literature?
There's only so much you can do with math. It is inherently a more difficult topic to
No,
talk about and teach.
Professor, it's the hard. The problem is the explanation.
Hey, not everybody can be me.
I know.
We know.
Can we coordinate you?
Good night. Hello. How are you? Hello. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. What are we looking at now? All right, here we go. Let's do some work. How you doing, Marino? Doing all right?